Bienvenidos, bienvenidas, bienvenides todos, bienvenue à tous. Thank you so much for joining us today at the RELAM CLASHSA Symposium. We are dedicating this symposium to exploring and celebrating Latin American and Caribbean studies research as it takes shape in our city of Montreal. I've been working with the amazing students of CLASHSA, the Caribbean and Latin American Studies and Hispanic Studies Association of McGill, on this event for many months. And I'd like to thank Ella Klein, Sara Orejuela, and Will Sankey, among others, for being such wonderful collaborators. And in particular, I'd like to thank my co-director, Professor Jessica Payeras Robles of UCAM, who's been such a wonderful person to work with on a range of events over the years. And I also want to thank our administrator, Daniel Chu Castillo. In addition to working on a very fascinating dissertation project, Danielle has been a strong and important part of our team. And Danielle will be facilitating a really awesome exchange between graduate students in Montreal and Mexico, hopefully in the coming year. RELAM has had a very robust tradition of yearly Congreso Estudiantil, which some of you have probably participated in. It used to take place across the 4 universities, and it also include populations from beyond Montreal. But when COVID-19 struck, the conference was moved online and it never really recovered. And so we're hoping that this symposium can kind of offer a variation of such an event to bring together faculty and students from across the city and people at various stages in their research journeys to share ideas, ask questions, and inspire each other. RELAM finally thrives on the volunteer labor of its members, and so I hope that you will consider getting in touch with me about taking an active role in helping to continue RELAM's important work. We need all the help we can get, and this work requires extensive labor, but it's also incredibly beneficial to our dynamic diasporic communities and Latin Americanists and Caribbeanists in Montreal. So thank you so much for being with us today, and adelante.
Les estaba diciendo, me llamo Sara y en este primer panel que se llama Pasados y Futuros de los Estudios Latinoamericanos tenemos a 3 investigadores cuyas trayectorias y perspectivas nos invitan a reflexionar sobre lo que ha sido y lo que podría ser el campo de los estudios latinoamericanos.
No sé si ustedes estarán de acuerdo, yo creo que el interés por América Latina está en una fase de declive. Es decir, lo que fue este interés por una sociedad, por sociedades que parecían justamente en movimiento, proponiendo cosas nuevas, con cambios y demás, ahora puede llamar la atención, pero incluso por razones negativas, como la presidencia de Milei en Argentina, o lo que fue Bolsonaro en Brasil, y otros fenómenos, o El Salvador, etcétera, etcétera. Pero también yo noto una pérdida de interés en estudiantes locales en América Latina. Los estudiantes latinoamericanos les interesa América Latina, les interesa sobre todo los latinoamericanos, por ejemplo, en posición de migración, y menos los países de ellos. Estoy hablando de la sociología sobre todo, tal vez en ciencia política las cosas son aún distintas, pero lo que me llama la atención, y termino con esto como algo muy positivo, es que yo lo que noto también es que desde hace unos 5, 10, 15 años, y la creación del RELAM hace 11 años, yo diría, fue en el 2004, es un signo de esto, es el surgimiento aquí en Montreal y en otras partes, pero sobre todo lo observo en Montreal, de una especie de ecosistema latino, en donde se entremezclan redes académicas, pero también profesionales, también sociales, comunitarias, y de alguna manera empezamos a mezclarnos y a circular y a pensar que tenemos intereses convergentes, que hacemos investigación, pero también trabajamos con grupos que acompañan migrantes. Hacemos investigación académica, pero también nos juntamos con profesionales que se insertan en el mercado laboral, que son de origen latinoamericano o que quieren trabajar con América Latina y nos consultan y se acercan a nosotros y nosotros a ellos. En ese nuevo espacio emergente yo creo que hay un potencial increíble y eso es algo que a mí me deja muy contento porque si bien digo, bueno, América Latina ya no atrae como objeto de estudio como lo fue en los años 90, 2000, 2010, está esta otra realidad que es más local, pero que me parece que tiene una inmensa riqueza. Y ahí termino. Muchas gracias.
He dado clases sobre temas que tienen que ver con la región y soy parte de grupos de estudios sobre América Latina, en América Latina y aquí. Me sigue costando también trabajo considerarme especialista en la región, ¿no? Comparto eso también realmente soy especialista en esta región. Y creo que, reflexionando al respecto, creo que quizás se deba también en parte a lo difícil que es definir la región, ¿no? Y lo que queremos decir con el término América Latina o América Latina y el Caribe. Y me quedo con estas citas del historiador Mauricio Tenorio Trillo. Les recomiendo mucho este libro para pensar precisamente en estos temas. Él escribe, Latin America has never designated a geographically or historically tangible reality, at least not with a minimum of empirical and conceptual rigor. The term Latin America should be taken then with a grain of salt, regarded as being always surrounded with what are called scare quotes. ¿No? Y en realidad estas palabras me resuenan mucho y me ayudan a entender también otra cosa que escribe Tenorio, pero que también muchos lo han dicho de diferentes maneras, y es que it is nearly impossible not to voice imperial and racial connotations when articulating the concept of Latin America. En realidad sabemos lo difícil que es medir, interpretar, pensar en la idea de América Latina. Antes de que yo empezara mi doctorado, entre hacer mi licenciatura y hacer el doctorado, trabajé un par de años en un estudio de opinión pública que se llamó Las Américas y el Mundo, que entre otras cosas se intentó como medir y entender cómo se sentían las personas en América Latina sobre su condición como latinoamericanos, ¿no? Cómo pensaban, si se pensaban ellos mismos latinoamericanos o no. Y bueno, la oportunidad de trabajar en este proyecto, por un lado, me dejó muy escéptica de los estudios de opinión pública y qué tanto podemos saber qué tanto podemos realmente aprender de las encuestas, pero bueno, una de las cosas que publicamos con respecto a este estudio es que no hay un patrón claro que pueda discernir cómo los ciudadanos de distintas partes de América Latina se sienten latinoamericanos. En realidad haces estas preguntas y por ejemplo, la respuesta en México es muy distinta que la respuesta en Colombia, muy distinta que la respuesta en Brasil. Los mexicanos eran los que más se sentían latinoamericanos, quizá por su condición de ser vecinos de Estados Unidos, pero también era una tendencia que conforme se ha ido haciendo este estudio a lo largo de los años ha ido en bajada esa tendencia, o sea, como que ahora se consideran menos latinoamericanos que antes. Este es un snapshot nomás del cambio de 2006 a 2008, que fue en el momento en que yo estuve trabajando en esta encuesta. Pero, por ejemplo, en Colombia los números eran mucho más bajos, en Brasil es bajísima, o sea, la gente no se considera latinoamericano y tiene mucho también que ver con el idioma, quizá, entre otras cosas.
First, I'd like to welcome Craig Hetherington to present. Craig Hetherington is Concordia University Research Chair in Environmental Anthropology and has written about Paraguayan environment, agriculture, and bureaucracy. He's joined by Javiera Araya, PhD in sociology from UDM and specialist on legal insecurity and the Supreme Court in Chile, and Jonathan Wald, who teaches in engineering and society at Concordia and researches climate change regulation in Brazil.
I've been part of RELAM for a little while and definitely part of this community, but I don't necessarily think of myself as a Latin Americanist, and this is partly just coming from a position of not thinking of either Latin America or even the places where I have studied that are in Latin America as the objects of study themselves. I was involved in a project recently with a whole bunch of other scholars who sort of think the same way, in which we were trying to think from a Latin American experience. So what I'm going to try to do to present today is a little bit what that project was about, and it's more than anything else, it's an invitation to look at the publications that came out of it.
Bueno, la historia que les voy a contar yo en español, que en el texto que está incluido en esta selección de textos que les presentó Craig y que está en ambos idiomas, es una ilustración de esta fragilidad de los hechos que estuvimos discutiendo cuando estuvimos conversando en este grupo de investigación.
Hello, everyone. I want to begin my presentation by telling you a bit about what brought me to the discipline of Latin American and Caribbean Studies. In my first semester at McGill, I enrolled in a Hispanic literature class, and my life changed. Not because everything I was learning was new to me. I'm Argentinian, I've spent a lot of time in Latin America, and I feel very connected to my roots, but because I had never been in a space where my academic strengths were just as valuable as my inherited knowledge. This realization was revolutionary for me, leading to a conscious decision to pursue this field. I recognized the need to tell stories that don't fit neatly into popular narratives about Latin Americans. In my second year, I encountered the concept of the feminist hook, which refers to the easily digestible portrayals of Latin American women and movements throughout the Cold War era. Think of Central American female militants or the Madres de la Plaza de Mayo in Argentina. These movements and figures are extremely important, and I do not want to discount them. However, focusing only on the revolutionary militant or the suffering mother leaves the stories of other women untold, stuck between frames that don't fully encapsulate them. The story that I chose to tell is a personal one, but I chose it in order to expand what we consider to be Latin American lives and to dispel the often stereotypical depictions that we see.
Democratic decline often precedes overt authoritarianism. Additionally, I considered theories of clientelism and elite ascendant democracy to understand how Venezuela's reliance on oil wealth created networks of patronage that ultimately undermined genuine political representation.
As a film and media art curator and programmer, I also work alongside my students to emphasize the relevance of film and media curatorial work as a key aspect of academic research and also as a beautiful way to link our universities with the broader communities. Through the affective labor that curation implies, one that also includes the lived experiences of everyone that participates in these projects as a crucial methodological tool. I analyze Latinx Canadian and Latinx Quebecois filmmakers and films through the lens of translocality. That is, the local, community-based, bottom-up interactions and networks within and between urban areas that enable us to reconsider everyday experiences and practices beyond the constraints imposed by the scale of the nation states with its bureaucracies, its borders, and neoliberal and corporate economies. The scale here is at the level of our household, blocks, neighborhoods, and cities, our communities, which allow more agency to artists and filmmakers, I would say also to scholars, and it's essential to understanding diasporic cinemas and migrant filmmakers' sense of home, integration, and belonging in the host society. One of the primary case studies I'm working with now is what we call the Toronto Latinx boom of the 1990s, and particularly the Crossing Border International Festival of Latin American Short Film and Video, held in 1995 and led by the Southern Current Film and Video Collective that was founded in Toronto in 1993. This initial showcase was followed by a second iteration in 1997. These gatherings eventually led to the foundation of Alucine, a Latin film and media festival, one of the leading platforms for Latinx Canadian cinema in Canada, nationwide.
Tive essa ideia de falar de sujeito do objeto, enfim, por nenhum motivo específico, mas eu fiquei pensando, né, como que eu me sentia, especificamente estudando América Latina no Canadá, e eu percebi que isso foi tratado aqui antes também por outras pessoas. sobre como que a gente às vezes sai do nosso país, às vezes Chile, México, Argentina, Brasil no meu caso, e a gente vem para cá e a gente cai num ambiente que você vira de repente um especialista em América Latina, coisa que eu não era antes. Mas bom, então o que eu estava pensando, né? Eu pensei em fazer isso mais como se fosse quase que uma sessão de autorreflexão e terapia. Então, a primeira pergunta, né? O que significa, né, estudar América Latina e Caribe a partir do Canadá? Eu basicamente diria que dentro do Canadá eu sinto ainda, né, uma boa comunidade de pessoas que estudam América Latina e Caribe, pessoas que estão bem engajadas, né? Acredito que, para mim, enquanto pessoa latino-americana que está estudando também América Latina, mas não só América Latina, eu converso isso muito com o meu orientador, né, Julian, que está aqui. Que em alguns momentos você acaba virando o sujeito do próprio objeto de estudo, né? Então você em alguns momentos passa a ser ao próprio estudo enquanto você está fazendo estudo, e isso eu entendo que normalmente a gente tenta se desvencilhar do objeto de estudo, mas a gente acaba em algum momento virando o próprio objeto de estudo. Então é um pouco daí que eu comecei a minha reflexão. E coisa também que a gente mencionou antes, né? Como que a gente move against essa colonialidade de poder, né? Essa questão de hierarquias de saberes, né? Isso é uma coisa que eu constantemente tenho percebido aqui no Canadá, mas o Canadá também está inserido em todo um outro contexto de América do Norte, Ocidente. Então, como que a gente consegue, mesmo lendo artigos e trabalhos escritos em inglês, em francês, como que a gente também consegue, manusear isso e conseguir mover, né, contra, né, trabalhando junto. Isso já foi até tratado numa mesa anterior também, como que a gente consegue, mesmo dentro da área acadêmica, conseguir mudar um pouco essa relação de colonialidade de poder y de saberes, ¿no?
A mediados de 2024 me uní a un grupo que solía llamarse Estudiantes Latinos en Montreal. El grupo nació con el objetivo de crear un espacio para el intercambio de ideas y de lecturas de nuestros trabajos de investigación. Es decir, el grupo nació con la idea de ser abrigo y estímulo para quienes somos oriundes de algún país de Latinoamérica y el Caribe, hacemos investigación en la región y además estudiamos en Montreal. Hace unos meses decidimos formalizar el grupo, o más bien fortalecerlo. Para ello optamos por adoptar un nuevo nombre, y tras una larga deliberación que pasó por justamente discutir qué es esto de Latinoamérica, qué es esto del Caribe, debemos adoptar ese nombre u otro, decidimos llamarnos Lecturas Liminales, Perspectivas Latinoamericanas y del Caribe en Montreal. Escogimos la palabra liminal en honor a la propuesta de Gloria Anzaldúa, a queer Chicana poet, writer and feminist theorist, quien transitaba libremente entre el inglés y el español, recordando sus diversas pertenencias. Gloria Anzaldúa defendió la liminalidad como un posicionamiento, un vivir entre, que lejos de cerrar o clausurar, abre y posibilita diálogos y agencias en múltiples direcciones. La liminalidad nos permite transitar entre las identidades que nos concede el habitar fuera de nuestros espacios de origen. Aquí somos identificadas como parte de la población BIPOC, Black, Indigenous and People of Color, y del grupo de estudiantes internacionales que viven la precariedad de un permiso temporal que acecha con su caducidad. La liminalidad es también nuestro punto de partida para contribuir a los estudios latinoamericanos y caribeños, un ámbito de investigación y formación amplio que se orienta a la comprensión de las dinámicas y procesos sociales desde sobre la región. La diversidad de este ámbito se refleja en trabajos con heterogéneas apuestas teóricas y metodológicas, así como en el plurilingüismo.
So when I tell people that I specialize in Caribbean literature, they almost always ask me why. And their curiosity is understandable. I'm a white woman from Edmonton, Alberta, with no family ties to the region. In fact, I became interested before I'd ever even been there. But this question is hard for me to answer. Sometimes I just go on a little rant about how interesting the Haitian Revolution is. Sometimes I gesture towards the contingency of program requirements. So as an undergraduate at the University of Alberta, I had to choose between these 4 courses. Gender and race were full, so I ended up in Empire and the Post-Colonial, and it just kind of stuck. Sometimes I mention that Derek Walcott, the Nobel Prize-winning poet from St. Lucia, visited the University of Alberta while I was an undergrad. As a 20-year-old, I was starstruck. Derek Walcott had some sexual harassment scandals that have become more common knowledge post-Me Too, so that story doesn't work as well as it used to either. And the fact is, people often want something personal. And in that regard, I don't have that much to say. One element of my attraction to the region, however, was its linguistic diversity. At the time of Walcott's visit, I was already learning French and Spanish. Turning toward the Caribbean would encourage me to keep going with those languages, breaking out of the monolingualism of my family, and it seemed like a straightforward way to contribute to the field. Eventually, this led me to comparative literature program at NYU. So if I really had to dig for something, I might frame my desire for a multilingual approach to the Caribbean as a kind of detour, to use the language of the Martinican theorist Edouard Glissant. Because, of course, based on the federal discourse on which I was raised, becoming French-English bilingual is an essential component to being a good Canadian, the way to make this country, with its own past of colonial conquest and fragmentation, function. Anyone who works on Caribbean literature constantly contends with questions of framing. After all, so many Caribbean writers can be absorbed into other categories: the post-colonial, Francophonie, Latin America, the Black Atlantic, the diasporic, migrant or minority writing, the transnational, or simply world literature. I see this situation as an opportunity to bring Caribbean writers into all kinds of conversations in ways that implicitly challenge their parameters. There are practical challenges to playing this role of interlingual brokers, including the need to rigorously double-check all French accents because no one else will catch any mistakes when you do this. And there are also rewards to knowing that you've helped open up dialogues that might not otherwise have happened. So I wrote in the chapter on Olivier that, given Olivier's own concerns with multiplicity, it is fitting that his presence in this volume should be a reminder that there is more than one tradition of Black writing in this country and that Haitian Quebecois work needs to be taken on its own terms. That negotiation between particularity and relation, between respecting what is specific and translating what can be shared, is at the core of both my work on the Caribbean and my life here in Montreal. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Krista Moyedny, and I find myself in my last year here at McGill studying Honors Hispanic Studies. And today I'm going to essentially present the research that I did for my honors thesis, which is a paper titled Temporalidades Fracturadas y Obsesiones Nostálgicas, la adicción y el proceso creativo en la novela luminosa de Mario Lebrero. So, fractured temporalities and nostalgic obsessions, addiction, the creative process in the luminous novel by Mario Lebrero. So to start with a brief introduction of the novel, introduce the various analytical lenses that I take, moving on to literatura en drogadicción y literatura drogada específicamente, and followed by marcos teóricos, el edicto libreriano. And then in the thesis, I do a comparative analysis between various works from the dirty drugged realism of the United States. So we look at William Burroughs and Philip Dick. And especially since there's an intertextual connection between Mario Lebrero, especially La Novela Luminosa, and Yonki, El Almuerzo Desnudo y otras. Entonces, so the luminous novel, for me, it takes addiction out of its literal sense and makes it sort of a metaphor for the human experience in this fractured late capitalist society we're living in. And connecting that to more Latin American studies in general, I have been very interested in addiction as a phenomenon, disconnected from sort of the use of drugs, but more as something I feel that humanity as a whole is becoming more disillusioned with these systems of oppression. We feel more of a need to find evasion, find escape in these sources of pleasure, and we are therefore distorting our relationship. And I think America Latina and el Caribe provide a very unique lens to view addiction, especially since addiction crisis is now rising in Latin America to some of the same levels that we have seen in North America. And I think it provides a very interesting lens going forward to how we're going to reconcile, not just in like a Latin American community, but as humanity with pleasure seeking and pain. So, obrigado, gracias, merci, thank you.
Hello everyone, thank you so much for being here, especially as the last presentation of the day. It's a pleasure to share some of my current explorations and considerations as I reflect on the stakes of my future doctoral research into Afro-Argentine history and slavery in early post-independence Buenos Aires, and specifically thinking about the racial narratives that are largely taken for granted despite being deeply entrenched within public memory. Together, the monument and the Inari campaign image displace Blackness from Argentina. Despite both seeming to acknowledge Blackness, one frames it as sacrificial and historical, and while the other is understood as contemporary but recent and still inextricably linked from its Caribbean or West African origins. These representations allow the state to signal inclusion while continuing to deny any accountability regarding their complicity in the transatlantic slave trade or its afterlives. What these images ultimately reveal are not just shared iconographies, but shared strategies of historical forgetting, ones that mobilize the conceptual Caribbean, and Haiti in particular, to displace national histories. By making Blackness legible only through temporal or geographic foreignness, Argentina and Quebec both participate in broader hemispheric narratives that obscure the memory of slavery, sever Black communities from their histories that produce them, and render accountability impossible. For my own work on Afro-Argentine history and slavery, this is not just an intellectual concern, but it's the heart of the matter. To write histories of enslaved peoples and spaces imagined as white is to write against the grain of national myth and collective memory. But it is precisely through these kinds of unexpected connections between Latin America, the Caribbean, and beyond that we can make these erased histories legible. Thank you.
As you probably know, my name is Ella Klein. I'm the president of CLASHSA, the Caribbean and Latin American Studies and Hispanic Studies Association at McGill.
Hey everyone, my name is Sara Orejuela and I'm currently the VP Finance of CLASHSA, although to be honest, I've kind of done a bit of everything this past year. So yeah, thanks to our incredible president, Ella, and the wonderful team we've built.
Thank you. We want to especially thank Will, Selma, Chris, and Elsa, who handled the incredibly difficult work of not only researching every single presenter, but also coordinating schedules, writing emails, preparing materials, translating, phoning the event, and handling all the little things that no one sees, but that make something like this actually happen.
We also owe so much to Professor Catherine Zion, who was the one driving force behind this becoming a reality. Catherine, thank you for your constant support, your guidance, and your donation. You helped make this possible in more ways than one. Of course, we're deeply grateful for the AUS, the Arts Undergraduate Society, the McGill Alumni Association, Student Sponsorship Program, and the Dean of Arts Development Fund for their support and funding. Your generosity helped bring this symposium to life. Now for a couple words on like a personal note. I'm incredibly grateful to be giving the closing remarks for this beautiful initiative that truthfully I never imagined would take shape in such an organized, thoughtful, and inspiring way. The idea for the symposium came to me during my second semester of taking Hispanic Studies classes, coinciding with the semester I joined CLASHSA. It is a reflection of the passion and deep interest that already exists and will continue to grow in the field of Latin American and Caribbean studies. I hope this is only the beginning of many more conversations we'll have to hold, both here in Montreal and across the world, about what it means to study Latin America and the Caribbean, what it means to us, what it comes to mean for the world. Wanting to explore this field, like all the presenters mostly said, didn't just come from a sense of heritage, although that plays a big part. It also came from a desire to reconnect with the stories, the histories, and the knowledges I felt I was losing when I left Colombia and did my high school years here in Montreal. I didn't want to learn just to integrate, but to remember, to not forget where I come from. I wanted to understand what I had missed because I couldn't bear to feel disconnected. I feel seen and represented at a time when I still feel like I am adjusting to a different and perhaps uncomfortable environment. There is an academic interest for me, yes, but there's also a deeply personal one, like most speakers shared. And I genuinely hope this field continues to grow because as long as there are Latin Americans, desde que sigamos siendo testigos de la tierra en Aviala y que Aviala siga siendo testigo de nuestra existencia, there will always be something worth researching, worth telling, worth honoring. At the same time, I want to recognize that this field is not only for those of us who are from the region. There are also many people, students, scholars, and community members who are not Latin American themselves or Caribbean, but who approach this work with care, commitment, and a genuine desire to listen and learn. This field belongs to all who engage with it responsibly and passionately. Thank you all so much for being here and for making this dream a reality. Same time in a couple years.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for your lovely words. It's been such a pleasure working alongside you and seeing the results of your dedication and passion. I want to close with a quote by Gloria Anzaldúa, who actually was my introduction to Latin American studies 5 years ago when I was in high school in California. And a quote that I really love is, "The path of knowledge requires that we apply what we learn to all our daily activities, to our relationships with ourselves, with others, with the environment, with nature. Escritoras, artistas, scholars, activistas transmit knowledge to help others cope. Through knowledge, we liberate ourselves. Through knowledge, we question the limitations of a single culture or nationalistic identity. Walking el camino de conocimiento by the light of one's knowledge enables us to close the gaps, bridge the abysses." Thank you.